Hey there everyone, this is Jeremy, the Music Andy, and we're here today to talk about Wet Leg from Wet Leg. Debut album, time for Wet Leg. They're starting it off with a self-titled album, which I always think is the personal way to go when you're starting off a debut album. This is a duo group from the UK, Rianne and Hester being the two. They're going to be doing some indie pop, indie rock, throwing in some sprinkles of post-punk revival, Neo-Psych, maybe some noise pop in there as well as a little garnish. I know that there was some hype surrounding this band around their single, Chasie Lounge. I never really listen to singles when they come out. I prefer to listen to the album and wait for it then. I like to listen to everything as one cohesive unit. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, because I'm digging right into this album right now. With this group, we're going to hear a lot of influences going on here. They're going to be taking from modern bands that are being played right now to old school bands with sounds that kind of have lingered on to the more modern scene. I think that even though despite being kind of notable in these influences, they're going to still put a unique twist on a lot of it and have a lot of personality in this album. There are some moments that it does become a little bit repetitive, and some tracks start to bleed over, and more so the inspiration kind of takes over the track for the most part. But again, for the most part, I think that they do a very good job of creating unique twists and adding a unique personality to this. When the track Being in Love starts off this album, it really kind of sounded like a Lucy Dacus track for me, just more so on the vocals, a lot more hushed, a little bit lo-fi in its sound. But instantly, this is a very notable song because it gets straight into the action almost right after the first verse that's on this. You have a robust, chugging bass, you have some distorted, quirky guitars, you have some sharp synth tones going on, and the way that this track moves is very mountainous. It has a lot of slopes, and then it's got a lot of mountains that it climbs. It starts very minimal, and then it kind of explodes into something that has a lot of layers and a lot of moving parts to it. Vocals are fun and carefree, and so are the lyrics. I think that this is a solid opener from the band on this album. Chasie Lounge opens up, and it has them talking about getting the big D, as in a degree. I think it's very humorous. I never myself got a big D. I went halfway. I couldn't take the big D, and then I got out. This really reminds me of Yard Act, another noticeable band that came out this year. They had some notable singles that crowded a lot of hype. They were from the UK as well. And I think that they both kind of have this minimal kind of punk soundscape that's going on, and then it kind of explodes into more dynamic pieces. But not just the way that this is more minimal punk, but it's also just the vocals on this as well. They're a lot more laid back. They're very chilled in their delivery. They're sarcastic. They're humorous. It's very fun to listen to go along with. And yes, going along with the lyrics, my mother is worried about me. Please don't send anybody else to make her worry even more than she already does. I love this track. I think that the lead guitar is very fun. It's very silky, twinkly, it's noodly. It's going kind of all around. The bass is very prominent, again, kind of something that's going to happen a lot on this album. And the drums, for the most part, are just kind of doing their part, and that's all you really need to do. I think it's a solid track. Angelica is the track on this one that is probably my favorite, and since I've been doing comparisons, what's two more to do on this one? The first one, I think that a good band to kind of compare it to on this track is Gorilla Toss. There's some noise pop going on here, there's some dance punk going on, and the other one that I would say is probably Dummy, in the way that these tracks, when they kind of get going into those explosive, more dynamic moments, with that bass chugging, it kind of gets those Neo-Psych, those shoegaze feelings going. And I think that Dummy definitely follows the noise pop formula as well. And I think that's something that Wet Leg's doing on this track as well. From this dance punk style to this more, dreamy Neo-Psych vibe, the track is going to just kind of rock between the two of these, and it's going to do it in a very well done way. I Don't Want to Go Out is a track that I think is going to be like a perfect summer track. I think it's incredibly warm. I love the all around me feeling when I'm listening to this on the track. It's very suffocating, but in a nice way. There's a note switch on the hook on this one with the melody, and it kind of makes it go a little bit more down-tempo, a little bit more depressive, and I think it's a nice little transition from them. It's very subtle. The angelic backing vocals that are at the end of this track kind of really has me paying attention to this album a little bit more as I was going through this one. There's a lot of tiny details that are kind of placed throughout this album. And though a lot of things can kind of get repetitive, and again, they can kind of bleed over, for the most part, when those dynamic moments happen and the bass is just kind of chugging away at the same, tempo, at the same notes, all of these eighth notes being played, things can get a little bit repetitive, but I think the band does a good job of adding little tiny details to kind of separate each one of the tracks. What Dream brings up some questions I didn't want answers to. What is Buffalo 66? And so after I first heard it on the track, I instantly paused it and I looked up what Buffalo 66 is. It's a film of a prisoner getting out of jail. He's going to meet his parents and he wants to show them his wife. The only thing is that he doesn't have a wife, so he's going to kidnap somebody to play his wife. And I just got to say, if somebody's pulled on the side of the road, just touching themselves and then rolling down the window and saying, hey, do you want to come back to my house and watch Buffalo 66? You just got to get the fuck out of there, to be honest with you. This track kind of has one sound. It isn't very dynamic. The more reserved verse parts still kind of contain the same max volume as the more explosive, swingy, catchy moments of the track. I do think that this is a fun track. I think the disco drums on this do a very good job of making it a fun track. Again, solid track. Convincing almost tricked me that Lana Del Rey snuck onto this track. I think that there's a super nice bass line on this one. It's probably one of the most tasteful bass lines of this entire album for me. There's some nice jagged guitars kind of going along with this. And then when we get into the chugging section, again, it just kind of feels repetitive. It feels like we've heard this one too many times at this point. Loving You goes back to more of the indie style of this album. I think that a lot of people were kind of hating on this track from what I was seeing in comment sections revolving around this. I know it's only been a day, but people are very, prominent with their opinions. And I think that a lot of people didn't like this. I don't know why. I think that it has some of the nicest progressions on this album. It has some of the freshest takes on this album, some of the best tones on this album. I think it might be just the indie nature of people just shitting on indie music. But the bass line that's on this one is kind of knocking on the door of Under Pressure. Again, there's an angelic synth kind of raining down keys on this track that are very interesting to me. The guitar will go from reverb, distorted, to like acoustic. I think that they're playing around with a lot of sounds on this one and a lot of tones, and I think that they did it well. I don't know why a lot of people aren't talking about this track in particular, but it's a shame. I guess more for me. Your Mom has glitches, some beep boops. It's got a very nice slick guitar on it, but the chugging section on this one, again, just kind of feels like the same old run-of-the-mill hook that we've been hearing a lot on this album. I mean, if you want to do it, just add a little bit more different instrumentation going on and maybe change the tone a little bit. The melodies are changing for the most part, but it's all kind of merging together, and again, it's just kind of bleeding together on these tracks. I will say, though, that this does throw in a little bit of a wrench into the mix. When the screaming vocals come out, it really kind of alerted me back to this album and put my full attention back onto it. I did a very good job of contrasting. I wish it was done a little bit more on this album, but I'll take one scream. Why not? But I say that, and then this track does a fade out, and I can't forgive fade outs. You gotta just end the song. Just find an ending for the song and do it. Oh No is another track that was kind of shit on by a lot of the fans in the comment sections of the websites I was on. And I don't, again, understand why. I think that this is another track that has a lot of personality to it. It sounds very unique inside of this album. There is a lingering gain kind of scratching the background on this one. When the bass does get going, it's not doing its typical chugging. It's doing more of this walk pattern, and the vocals are going to march on top of it. I think that everything sounds very fresh here, like I said. The vocals are working well with the instruments. Everything is very supportive and just kind of elevating each other on this track. I will say that I don't think that the lyrics are very much on this one, but I don't think that's what they needed to be. You just got to follow the melodies and the rhythms that are on this one. And again, I just think this is a very unique, playful track. Piece of Shit, again, returns us to the indie side of this one. It has a very swinging nature to it. I think that the lyrics and the vocal delivery on this one, again, are sarcastic. They're super passive-aggressive. Not a mind-blowing track by any means, but I think that it works well. Supermarket is a track that made me feel like I had no bones in my body. I just felt very loose. Everything is just kind of slow motion. It has a lot of stoner vibes going on it. And if you read the lyrics, it definitely makes sense. I'm all for getting high, but you might want to not do it if you're meeting somebody's parents for the first time. And I love the lyrics talking about going to the supermarket and shopping until you're weak in the knees, like it's some kind of crowning achievement to go to the supermarket. And for some people that it is. And it is a nice thing to just go to the supermarket sometimes and make those grown decisions between, you know, whole milk 2% and skim milk. I think this is a very fun track. I think it does a good job of not taking itself too seriously. And again, it's just enjoyable. Too Late Now ends this album more on the dreamy side. All of the instruments are a little bit more reserved. The bass is more prominent on this one, as it has been for the majority of the album. And the guitars that come in are very nice. They're very euphoric and slicing into this track. The band comes together and does its fire explosion in its classic way. And it's funny that I say classic because this is their debut album. There's nothing classic about them. But just listening to this album, it already feels like a classic kind of staple to this band. These chugging moments of just, you know, walls of distortion and shoegaze and all that. Overall, I think that this was a very warm album. It was very laid back, sarcastic, humorous. Kind of felt like a kid smoking a cigarette on school grounds. Kind of cool. A lot of the personality that's on this album is from mixing and matching other people's personalities and groups' personalities. But even with taking bits and pieces of influences around you, when you finally do merge it together, you do get something that is unique because they have not been all put together before. I hope that in the future, the band kind of not fixes because that's kind of a messed up way to say it, but I hope that when it comes to the dynamic points, the more explosive points, that they play around with the layering, maybe the instrumentation that's going on, add a few more pieces to the band. It is a duo group, I understand that, but it could be more if it wanted to be. Or you can just get some studio musicians in there to add some new layering and sounds to it, because sometimes it does feel a little bit repetitive, and sometimes tracks do kind of bleed into each other. I think that comparatively, because I said Yard Act earlier, I think that this band kind of nailed it a little bit better than Yard Act. Yard Act had a few hits and misses. Sometimes it was a little bit more boring than it was just minimal and sounding nice. I think that they do a good job in Wet Leg of kind of engaging you as a listener and keeping it fun as a listen. Wallows, I kind of shit on you earlier for doing indie nature and adding just noise elements to it and just kind of wiping your hands clean of it. If you wanted to do it, you should have done it a lot more like this band and how they did it. I'm going to go 7.7 piss-stained jeans out of 10 on this one. What did you think of this album? What albums would you like me to review in the future? Please leave a comment below and let me know. Subscribe if you like the content, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Thank you.